There was another gloomy sign for the global economy this week, with the key index of shipping costs hitting an all-time low. The Baltic Dry Index is seen by some as a barometer of international trade, as it reflects demand for bulk commodities like iron ore and coal. But the plunge in shipping rates is putting freight forwarders in a world of pain, and industry insiders say charges have fallen so far it's cheaper these days to put your home contents in a cargo container than into a storage shed. Neil Woolrich reports.
All at sea as the shipping industry gets stuck in the doldrums.
Well, the global economy's not that great. The China imports has reduced, I think, about 4% in the last couple of quarters, which is quite dramatic in the global scheme of things. There's not much grain, steel, coal being moved around at the moment.
And that gloomy outlook is reflected in the key gauge of shipping costs, the Baltic Dry Index, which measures the price of shipping bulk commodities like iron ore, coal and grains. At the height of the resources boom in 2008, the Baltic Dry peaked at nearly 12,000 points. But after that, it nosedived and this week fell to a record low of just over 500 points, another sign of the slowdown in global commerce.
Global trade is certainly weak for a combination of reasons. One of them is, of course, that China's growth is slowing down, and so that's seen weaker demand for commodities. But also, we've seen Western demand has been very weak because the business investment cycle has not picked up in the Western economies.
And that weakness in the world economy is also hurting Western governments as they set about trying to repair their budgets.
The expectations for world growth and world trade have been revised down again. The weakness of the Eurozone remains a persistent problem. There are rising concerns about debt in emerging economies.
Freight forwarder Richard Dexter argues there's been little upside for local consumers because the plunge in shipping costs has been offset by the Australian dollar's fall, which is pushing up the price of imports. But he says many in the shipping industry are hurting.
Well, freight forwarders typically would charge, say, for example, $50 US profit on a container and $100 on a 40-foot container. But when you've got rates down as low as $200 out of China, that's very hard to justify a $50 profit margin, so they're getting squeezed.
And now shipping costs have fallen so low it would cost less to send a homeowner's contents around the world than it would to hold them in a storage shed.
You can get a container from Melbourne up to Hong Kong for about $50, so you can bring it back for a round trip for $500. That's cheaper than a month's storage and a storage shed.
The cost of shipping has also been helped by the fall in oil prices, which are more than 70% down from their peak. And the slowdown in China's commodity demand has coincided with an increase in the supply of vessels, which some argue makes the Baltic Dry a less reliable barometer of global activity. Paul Bloxham says while China's economy is still fairly sluggish, the composition of growth is shifting, which is also creating less demand for shipping.
There's still growth in China, it's just coming in a different form, and of course that growth is more, if it's more driven by the services sector, is less traded. So a key reason why the trade cycle has been on the weak side has been partly to do with China's own shift in terms of the things that are driving its growth.
This week the Senate voted down a bill that would open up Australian shipping to more foreign vessels, many of which pay workers as little as $2 an hour. While the local industry breathed a sigh of relief that another competitive threat has been avoided, the tough times are set to stay.
Melbourne port imports went up a little bit last year, mainly because of very low shipping rates, and they took advantage of the high dollar while it was there. But I think we're going to see a bit of a decrease coming up in the near future.
And that may mean consolidation between existing players or leaving others high and dry.
A rapid decline in economic activity.
And what a lot of people fail to recognize, Rick, is when there's a change in the economy, it takes anywhere from 3 to 6 months for that to be reflected, for it to trickle down, so to speak, throughout the whole economy. So as that pivot has occurred back in October of 2015, we're 90 days out now.
Yes.
So now the markets are responding, not just markets here in the U.S., but like you said in that article there, markets in the UK are responding to the lack of transportation traffic in the U.S.
Yes.
And so it's a cascading effect.
So what are we going to see February, March, April? What are we going to see in April, 90 days out?
Okay, so you've got the ships that have stopped, basically stopped everything on traffic on the oceans. So now, 3 months from now...
Shortages.
That's right.
Shortages. I believe we're going to see shortages in stores, in the supply line, 90 to 120 days from now. You better buy the things that you need now. There are going to be shortages because the ships aren't moving now. The inventories are not being replenished. The warehouses will be empty, and the shortages will be severe.
Roger. Station calling. Mayday. This is Alpha Foxtrot 5 Tango X-Ray. Do you copy? Station calling. Mayday. This is Alpha Foxtrot 5 Tango X-Ray. Do you copy?
Welcome to End Time Talk Radio, where the truth is usually stranger than fiction. The purpose of these shows are not to scare you, but to prepare you, because what you don't know could hurt you. The word says in Hosea 4:6, "My people are destroyed for the lack of knowledge." Thank you for joining us. My name is Julie, and here is the host of the show, Barry Meyer.
January 13th of 2016, and major things are happening in our country here. Today, the Dow falls another 364 points. We are now down 2,200 points from the peak of the market. So currently we're seeing a lot of things happening in our market. Bulk dry index, if you've been following that now, is at 402. We'll be touching on that. Everything what's going on with the railroad, trucking, shipping. We're going to be touching on that because tonight we have Michael McCune. We've had him on before, all the way from Cheyenne, Wyoming. And Michael, we used to have you in my house, and now I moved away from you, so now we have to interview you on the phone. And Michael McCune was a former IRS auditor, won 7 out of 8 U.S. Supreme Court cases. And Michael, maybe you want to share maybe just a few more things about yourself.
Well, I'm a bum. I love to argue, and I live to analyze numbers, and that's basically what I've done.
Well, and I know that one of the things that you love to analyze is baseball. You do things that most people don't normally do.
Well, yeah, I as much as they break baseball down into statistics and numbers, I break it down even farther just because I like to know. I don't go in for the fantasy baseball or fantasy sports type stuff, but I like to break it down for my own self when I'm at a game or watching a game. Then I can figure out maybe right along with the manager what the strategy should be.
Mm-hmm. Well, some interesting things are happening in our country. Well, I think we'll start at the pinnacle with the president's speech. What you want to talk about because we'll delineate from the oil and everything else that's going on. And Michael, why don't you go ahead and start off with the president's speech that happened last night?
Boy, I tell you, that was maybe the worst State of the Union address that I have ever listened to in my life. The thing that got me was so many of the good points that he threw out were only good if you look at it from a very narrow perspective, in which that's not normally the perspective that people take. And what I'll look at first is the creation of more of 14 million jobs, his claim.
Mm-hmm.
He said we're in the middle of the longest streak of private sector job creation in history. More than 14 million new jobs the two strongest years of job growth since the 90s, an unemployment rate that's been cut in half. Now, the problem that you have with this is first of all, the 14 million jobs number. They're making jobs out of thin air. And just because there's 14 million more jobs doesn't mean that there's 14 million more people working. As you and I have discussed in the past, the participation rate, the workforce participation rate, is at its lowest level it's been in 40 years. It's down about 62% officially. And this is because the Department of Labor, they check and they find out, okay, is there somebody in the house that has a job? You say yes. Okay, that's good. They don't ask if you're legal to have a job. They don't ask if that person is employed in one or more jobs. They just want to know if you have a job. You may have worked 1 hour last week as a babysitter, and they will count that as a job. And that's what's wrong with the system. So the 14 million job claim is false on its surface, because if you also understand the first year that he was in office, well, the first 15 months that he was in office, the number of jobs continued to decline. And he's taking it from that point of decline. Actually, from the point that he came in to office, we have gained about 11 million jobs.
Yeah.
But it's not the 14 million. We lost 3 million more jobs after he left office. And here's the real kicker. Back in 1993, we had 153 million jobs in this country. We had a workforce participation rate that was almost at 70%, and we only had a 5.4% unemployment rate. Today it's at 5% unemployment rate. We have 40 million more people, and yet they're trying to tell me that the unemployment rate is at 5%. It just doesn't work. So when you go into the numbers and you start digging those things out, this is where you have to understand that what the president said last night in so many of his statements was false. But the most egregious statement that he made was when he tried to make a joke about the preparedness or the willingness of the United States to go after those that attack her. And he said, just ask Osama bin Laden. I don't want to ask Osama bin Laden anything. What I want to ask is the 4 people that died at Benghazi. I want to ask them questions about what they're doing, what they felt, what they saw. I really want to ask that personal security officer for Ambassador Stevens some questions. He has never been questioned. His name has never been released. And yet he was the only one. He was the only American was at the council at that night that got out alive. Now, why hasn't he answered any questions? Why hasn't he been called before a congressional hearing? They haven't been able to answer those questions. So I really, you know, when he makes jokes, when he's trying to lighten the mood, as he calls it, he's full of baloney, and it's really disgusting that he has ruined an economy. He's ruined our leadership in the world, and then he tries to make a joke about it.
Well, do you think the American people are going to start seeing through the lies?
I think they're doing it right now, those people that are behind. And again, all you have to do is look at what the stock market is doing. Look at some of the stuff that's coming up. Now, I don't listen to the people that are on Wall Street because they're all trying to sell me something. What I try to do is look at the various reports that come out and make my own conclusions. But it was funny. I saw a guy that is Larry Edelson, and he wrote a report, and he's talking about the Eurozone. He's talking about problems around the world, not just here in the United States. But he's looking at the Eurozone. For the first time We all know about Spain, Portugal, Greece, Italy, and Ireland, that they are all bankrupt, right? And for the first time, there's a new name on that list that he gave us, France. And so when you do those kind of things, and what really startled me again was his last line when he was talking about the Eurozone, and he said, capital controls now in place in Europe. Bail-ins are legal throughout the Euro Union. Should a bank fail, you're at risk of losing a major portion of your deposits. This was the tactic that Tim Geithner and Christine Lagarde concocted, and they tried it out at Cyprus. And it worked. The American people went, oh, I took a big yawn. Cyprus, it's a flea bite. Well, the problem is now you're talking about the Eurozone, which is arguably the fourth largest economy in the world. And they're doing the same thing. And what a bail-in is, it means that you go to bed tonight. You wake up in the morning, the bank doesn't open. The bank doesn't open until next Monday. When it does open, 40, 30, 80, I don't know what it is, but there is a portion of your deposits, a portion of the money that you have in your checking account, money in your savings account or your money market accounts, that is now the bank's, and you're given an IOU from the bank. People don't realize when they put money in the bank, the money that's there in any way, shape, or form does not belong to them anymore. It belongs to the bank under the provisions of the FDIC, and at any point in time, the bank can take those. What they do is they get an IOU for that that's gone. Until the bank is making a profit again, you'll never see it. Mm-hmm. But in Edelson's report, he just didn't hit the Eurozone. He wanted to show that it was consistent throughout the world, that there's problems. Russia is being devastated by the drop in oil prices because that is the only thing that Russia really has to export. Did you know that right now Russia, each person in Russia, everybody that consumes food in Russia, 40% of everything that is consumed has to come from outside the country.
Really?
Yeah. That is a startling, but here's, and this goes right along with it. The Russian stock market has dropped a third in the last 7 months. It's lost a third of its value in the last 7 months. Since the 2011 peak that it hit, it's lost 2/3 of its value.
Wow, that's quite a bit.
And then China, again, probably the brightest. And look at the turmoil that's going on in China economically. They're calling it stock market panic, is scaring the pants off of investors. But the problem is their currency, the yuan, is not strengthening, it's continuing to lose value, even after the devaluation that they made last year. Southeast Asia, Latin America, the United States, you go to any country you want, and there is recession or recession signals showing up. It's spooky. But that brings me back to the other one of the president was talking about. He's more focused on cutting carbon emissions. Carbon emissions have no purpose in global warming. They're an easy scapegoat. Mm-hmm. But if you go back and look at the research that was done on the Volstock ice cores that were dug up originally, back in the 60s, and those Volstock ice cores show you that the carbon levels raised not before there was global warming, but after global warming had taken effect. So in each and every case, when they point to carbon emissions, that has nothing to do with it. It is an effect from global warming, not a cause of global warming. Do you see what I mean?
Well, yeah.
You're putting the cart before the horse.
Well, what's interesting about that, carbon emissions, right now, I mean, the second largest coal producer now is declaring bankruptcy. I mean,
that's part and parcel. I'll go along with it. And you've lived in Wyoming. You know how much we rely on fossil fuel energies for our revenues. Right now, our state runs on a biennial budget, and they had $1 billion a year for that the state could spend for the 2-year period, $1 billion in each year. They were projecting when this started, when this was done last year, they were projecting that oil, for instance, was going to be at $70 a barrel on average. With the current price rate and everything else falling in value because of this glut that's on the market, they're not going to make it. They're going to be about $562 million short. And since they didn't make any cuts in the first year of the biennial, they're going to have to make them all in the second year of the biennial. How are they supposed to get anything done basically operating on 3/5 of a budget?
well, and that goes along with oil. And, when we left the pinnacle point, housing prices were pretty high. And I bet housing prices now are going down because there's no economy that's being stabilized by the fossil fuels and that.
Yeah, and oddly enough, though, the rental properties are going straight up. Rental properties, a 3-bedroom house now rents for about $1,500 a month here.
It's amazing, and now and this is kind of a sidetrack. Is that going to the immigrants that are coming over here? Is the government going to pay for that?
That's again. I have a member of my family that works for the housing authority here locally, and they've told me that because they're so full in Colorado and other surrounding areas, that they processed 32,000 claims last year for Muslims. 32,000 claims for people coming in.
And that's in Cheyenne, Wyoming.
Yeah.
Wyoming.
Somalians and stuff. Well, the reason is we still had some open roles. And so they got on, and once they're on, then they can apply somewhere else to go where there's a job. And what they do is then they move to the top of the line because they're already in the program.
Mm-hmm.
It's weird. It just, the whole thing kind of gets it. But you opened up with the stock market, and I'm going to go real quick. Last Friday, before this week's activities, Friday, officially, or on a technical basis, if you will, the United States entered a recessionary territory based upon just the stock market values alone, because they had dropped so much. We have talked, you mentioned in the open about the Baltic Dry Index and how low that is. It normally averages between 1,200 and 1,400, maybe 1,500 on average. That's good. And what they do is that's the measurement of the dry tonnage, not the value, but the actual volume of stuff that's in transit from one port to another. And to have it drop to 407, 402 is just incredible, because that means, again, 2/3 of what the world rests on. It's not just the United States, but 2/3 of what the world rests on for trade has disappeared. Now, Cheyenne, and we have a wonderful railroad. We've been a railroad town since we were founded back in the 1870s.
Yeah.
Right now, I was reading a piece, and the railroad companies are cutting every railroad, whether it's Union Pacific or CSX or Burlington Northern or whatever. They're not moving anything. Now, if you listen to the president, everything was fine on the economic front. Business is booming. If there's nothing moving by rail, nothing moving by ship, nothing moving by truck compared to what it was just 2 years ago, that the volumes are down 70, 80%. What does that tell you about the state of the economy? The consumer, this is where it starts at, is not buying. The consumer doesn't believe it because his wages, the average wage is flat. It's 0.1% higher than it right now than it was in 2000 at the end of the 2000 at the start of 2001. 0.1% higher.
My question, Michael, is this: I work in sales in a big box store. When does the face of that start showing to the people that, hey, we don't have the stuff for you guys, or people are just not buying from them?
Yeah, and again, I think this is why you're seeing the stock markets take a plunge. Of the first 23 companies on the S&P that reported their earnings rates for the fourth quarter, 19 of them missed the expectations. Here's the problem. Those expectations have been going down consistently since the 1st of December. The projections that Wall Street is using, the analysts, they have kept dropping those. Some of those are as much as 45% below where they were as of December 1st for the last month of the year, the biggest shopping season of the year. And all of a sudden, these reports now are coming in. 19 of 23 missed these lower expectations. What does that tell you? There's no wind in the sails. I mean, that's the best way to put it.
Well, and then, they were saying somewhere a few weeks back that I think they said 60% of most Americans now are living one paycheck from the street.
Yeah, there was a report that if you had a $400 bill, an unexpected $400 bill for a plumbing problem, or an illness, or something, a car that quit on you, $400 repair bill, that they would they would bankrupt because they can't pay for it. They don't have $400 clear and free in assets that they can liquidate. Think about that.
Well, and also on top of that, you look at Puerto Rico. I mean, they missed their payment here the first of the month, and and now all the investors are going, wait a second here, we need our money.
Well, if you go back and look, they paid, I believe it was $437 million at the 1st of October. They paid $437 million on a $2.7 trillion debt, or $2.7 billion that was due. Whatever it was, they were less than 1/5 of what they actually owed was paid. Mm-hmm. And so this is the second quarter in a row that they've missed that payment. You've heard me talk about the actual amount of debt that the United States owes.
Yes.
What the true debt is, and despite what they've been saying is, if we go into a court of law and had all of our assets taken, we'd still owe. I claim that we still owe $304 billion, $304 trillion for our debt, right?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Okay. There was an article again by a noted economist. He totaled up. He took the $18.87 trillion of official government debt, and he tossed in the state and local government debt, financial institutions debt, and came up with $64.57 trillion. Then he makes the big one: total U.S. unfunded liabilities, not including any of the above. You have to add in another $200 trillion. So he's up to $264 trillion. So again, I've been saying this for a long time, and I was laughed at. I mean, I'll be perfectly honest with you. Mm-hmm. They laughed at me when you throw that number out there. But now what's really spooky to me is the fact that more people are now all of a sudden going, oops, this is what we owe. 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 Where are our assets? We don't have manufacturing jobs. We don't have railroad jobs because, again, they're going the way of the dodo bird. Well, if you don't have truck drivers, if you don't have people loading and unloading ships, if you don't have train operators, then what is the economy actually based upon? Because we no longer have any GDP. They've shipped it all overseas in the name of climate change control.
Mm-hmm.
Go ahead.
No, and in the company I work for, they're always running these numbers. Well, we do this and we'll do that. We'll get more sales and stuff. And, it just seems like they're pulling that rubber band and stretching it further and further. Now, every week they're saying we need more credits. We need to get more people on credit cards. We need, it's all about getting more credit cards. And it's like, well, how long can you get this thing to go before the rubber band snaps back?
Right, and they're running on credit, and that's the whole point with a credit card. You're running on credit. And this started in the 60s. When they first came out with the credit card, the people that were adults then laughed at it because when they were kids, the recession was there. They knew what it was like not to have any money. And they refused to buy something until they could pay for it. Outside of maybe a house or a car, there was nothing that was bought on credit. Now look at what's happened in the 2 generations since then. That's all they know is credit.
Mm-hmm.
And sooner or later, I agree with you, that rubber band snaps. And it's one of those situations where when it snaps, it's going to come crashing down overnight, just like it did in Cyprus. And my question is, you're going to have to figure out a way to run an economy not based on a dollar.
Well,
or the British pound or the French franc or the euro or whatever it happens to be, because government coin is going to have no value, and that's going to happen almost overnight.
Well, now there's so many things that are happening in our country. Whether the standoff up in Oregon, the Muslims moving in, different things like that. Michael, I have a pointed question to ask you. Okay, with Russia now bringing 40% of all they eat in, when does it get to the point where Russia says, I'm sick and tired of your shenanigans, we come in and we take over because we need more food?
Right. Now, that the reason I brought up Russia was not, and I missed that point, was a few years back, I believe it was in 2003, all the 2 main uranium mines that are in Wyoming,
yes,
Russia bought them lock, stock, and barrel.
How long ago was that?
It's over a decade ago, about 2002, 2003. They bought all those. Nobody knows that. But all the yellow cake and all the stuff that was already processed that's sitting there, in addition to the uranium mines themselves, around Jeffrey City, no longer belong to America, but they belong to a foreign power.
Mm-hmm.
And they've done the same thing with copper mines. They've done the same thing with our coal mines. Most of the coal that's mined in Wyoming now heads straight to Vancouver and is shipped out to China.
Mm-hmm.
Well, my problem is if you are going to try and cut carbon emissions, wouldn't it have made sense to say, oh, well, we're going to cut ours, but we're not going to ship anything to anybody else to where they can burn it. It doesn't matter if the pollution is done in Asia or done here. It's one world. The air goes everywhere, just like the water goes everywhere.
Mm-hmm.
One of the big arguments that I had with Al Gore and his philosophy a long time back was they go in with an agenda on all these studies, and I don't care what the study is. The government, if it's paid for that study, you're not getting an honest study, and I can prove that by talking about the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration. Over the last 5 years, they put out 2 studies. One said that the acidic levels in the ocean was higher now than it had been in 800,000 years, and they blamed human activity, specifically human activity on the West Coast, for the problem. The second one was that the carbon level in the air is higher than it's been in 2 million years, and again, they blamed human activity. my question to both of those, I sent it back to the head of the NOAA, and I asked them point blank, where was the human population? What was the human activity that caused these levels to be higher, either 800,000 years ago or 2 million years ago? I never gotten an answer. Again, they never looked at that aspect. So we're still in normal ranges for the climate of the Earth. And yet they're trying to make a big deal about it and saying that man can control it. Well, if we could have controlled it, why wasn't it controlled all those years ago when there was no human activity? And this is where I have a real problem with. Until they can answer those questions, then they've just proven to me that they went in to do the study with our taxpayer dollars, funded by our taxpayer dollars, to prove something against our normal activity, our normal business cycle, our normal day-to-day activity. They want us to give that up to go to this global government, and I refuse to do that.
I do too.
Not going to be part.
Yeah. One of the things I wanted to mention on when you were talking about the bulk dry index, with the company I work for, they are getting now things back. Like people are complaining that, hey, this doesn't work because it's missing this, and they're sending back, they're having repairmen come out because these things don't work.
Yeah, they're built by the robot or robotic factories, a lot of these parts, and they're not. We used to have on-site inspectors that would look and verify that the work. Every once in a while, for instance, Ford Motor Company or somebody would yank a car off of the line that was coming off of the line and actually field strip it down and make sure that everything was where it was supposed to be. Everything was supposed. They don't do that anymore because that's a loss. That stops the production. It's a loss of revenue, and they lose that. And compliance laws of complying with government regulations, particularly in the global community, is taking up more than 30% of all their revenues now. Think about that, and wow. It's frustrating. But you were talking about the railroads and the shipping and the problems that they're having there. Railroads tonnage. The number of cars and the tonnage that they ship dropped dramatically in December. That should be the time of the year when things are moving the most. Instead, they dropped, and the reason that where they dropped was almost 9% drop in December alone. For the year, they were down almost 6% of the tonnage that these people were shipping. One of the few areas out of the 20 categories of rail cars that they have, one of the areas that did expand was automobile shipment.
Where I work at, I bring that up again because it pertains to, I met a gentleman that just moved up here from a certain area. He used to work for Lockheed Martin, and he was actually helped develop the fighter planes for the U.S. government. And he said, they're bringing foreign workers in that do not know and understand how to make these things. And like he said, he basically was, what is the U.S. government or military going to do when they need these fighter planes when they don't work because they have nobody that knows how to make them, add the parts and do everything to it?
Mm-hmm. I agree. And I wish I could argue with you, but this is the point. And it doesn't matter if it's a fighter plane or a washing machine, a dishwasher, if it's a car, if it's a lawnmower, these things, a vacuum sweeper, these things technology is old as dirt. But the problem that they have is they have forgotten, they've taken in the human element out of these things, and they're sanitized in the way that they're produced, and you can't tell if it's going to work or not, or how long it's going to work. A lot of companies are running on slim margins right now, and it just, I don't know, it's frustrating when you see that how far and how fast the markets are going to fall. But I think what we've seen this first week and a half of the new year, I think one of these days we're going to wake up and we're going to go, boy, that was a good old day. We only lost 300 points back then. and we're going to wish that we were only losing 300 points.
One of the people out there that have been talking a lot is, you might have heard of him, maybe not, Jim Willey, and he was saying that when oil hits $30 a barrel, that's when things are really going to slide really quick.
And that's one of the problems. The reason is so much of this is done on credit. So much of the exploration and the development of sites was done on speculation. It was done on credit, just like the government, figuring that it was going to be at $70 a barrel. So all of a sudden, when it's down below 30, they're hitting their margin calls with the banks. Their credit lines are hitting the margin calls because they know that they can't get enough revenue in, or they can't produce enough and get revenue in to pay those debts. And the banking system is really in a shock mode right now because these oil companies cannot pay their bills, and that could be a trigger that knocks our economy right off its pins. It could lead to a bigger recession, a longer recession, and a much more severe recession than what we saw in 2007, 2008, 2009.
One of the things that, with economy-wise, going along with all the Muslims here, I've been watching what's going on in Europe, and one of the biggest things that's now starting to happen, which I never really heard about, that's been over in the Middle East, now coming over there, and they're calling it to the rape games with Muslims against these women, and they have like 50 Muslims that hit like one woman, and they do whatever, and they're talking, it's coming to America.
Again, that's a criminal activity, and that's one of those ones where you have to sit back and say, okay, is it or isn't it? Well, see, the problem is, and you might have heard I can't remember the guy's name, the cleric that's here in the United States, and he flat announced that the Quran is their constitution.
Mm-hmm.
And anyway, when they do that, you go and look at the Quran, and you really read the thing. It starts off and it sounds as benign as the Bible, but when it gets to the second book, the second surah, then the tone begins to change, and by the time you're in the fifth surah, it's really changed. Originally, they start talking about believers and unbelievers or non-believers. By the time you get to that I say, just a short way into it, all of a sudden they're talking about true believers and unbelievers. And the biggest difference is a true believer only believes the way that you do. So you and I both profess to be Christians, so we cannot have any difference between the way we see it. Literally, there can be no difference. Otherwise, one of us has to be considered a non-believer and not a true believer, and therefore we're fair game because we don't have the true religion.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the gang rape thing is part and parcel of that.
Do you think that maybe this spring we could see an Arab Spring here in America?
I think you're going to see the amount of violence going up. That brings up Barack Obama's tearful address on gun control that he made last week. If he was so interested in saving lives, he would do away with cars and trucks because there was more people killed on the highways than were killed by guns. By 4-1, 5-1? And if he was really and truly concerned about human life, he would defund Planned Parenthood because they killed over 3 million unborn babies last year. So don't give me this malarkey that he is doing it for concern. Those were crocodile tears. He just wanted everybody to say, I care for you. He doesn't care less about it. It's just another way for Washington and for the mucky mucks to grab power and control over what you do in your daily life.
Well, and today at the company I work for, I had to watch a Department of Homeland Security video on what do you do when an active shooter comes around, and they were showing people how you crouch underneath the table and hide, or you try to find a place to run, and when you come out, you got to have your hands open and your fingers out and all this stuff. And I'm like, well, who's the one that they're after then? Because
Yeah.
I mean, they focus all
It's
this
not
stuff.
the shooter.
Yeah.
It's not the shooter. I agree with you, Barry, and this is what's so frustrating. And like I said, just once, I would like to see one of these armed assaults take place at a police station or at an FBI headquarters or someplace where everybody's packing a gun, because they don't do it. What they do is they pick on places that are gun-free zones.
Mm-hmm.
Time after time after time. Places where having a gun is unexpected. But they don't go after the places that do have guns. And I don't believe, personally, I don't carry a gun.
Mm-hmm.
But on everybody else's, and I've told my wife, you might as well get one before they ban them completely. But get one so at least you have some way of offering a defense for my kids and my grandkids.
You know, talking about that, here last month we had a big issue up in Missouri with propane tanks being taken, and also all the cell phones. And they had a video over in Syria. They're actually launching these 20-pound propane tanks and a mile away, and they were doing devastating things. Do you think that we could see something like that happen here in our country?
Absolutely. That was one of the setups that happened at the Columbine shooting. And this is why I think Klebold and Harris have been kind of wrongly accused. Did you know that they had 30 of those 20-pound propane containers that these two allegedly brought into the school?
I did not know that.
How many trips did they have to make? And the only reason I knew about this is at the time I was working for a sheriff's department as and doing their budget work, and I sat in on the daily briefings, and I heard about this. And I'm going, how did they get 30 of those things inside? Now, the detonators on them did not go off. But how did they get 30 of them inside and nobody noticed it?
We never even heard about that ever.
Yeah. So yeah, take a look at that. They had those propane with all the weapons that those guys were loaded down with. Explain to me how they got the bombs in there. Just those two guys. There had to be more people involved. Those were the two that went into active shooting, and so they're the ones that everybody blames.
Well, on the radio show that you're on with Pastor Stan and also Stephen Grant in defenseofanation.com, being in that church for the time we had, it helped us think outside the box, think for ourselves, and trust in God. And I see Americans not trusting in God, not thinking for themselves, and doing what the government tells them every moment of their day.
Well, if you go back and look at it, I think this was part of the plan way back when, before this is how they got the Great Society going, was the first thing they did under the terms of the Great Society was take prayer out of the schools. And yet our school system was founded so that people would know how to read the Bible. And the Bible cannot be even taken into a school these days.
Mm-hmm.
So, the changes came subtly, and we didn't understand. And there was some outrage at the time, but there was no organized protest to take our government down for what they were doing. And I think now people are starting to see that the greatest generation dropped the ball on their biggest fight because they did not recognize it.
In this area where I'm at, we're having a lot of people moving from different parts of the country, whether it's for work, whatever. But there's a great, I'd say, let's say 25%, might not be that high, where people are actually moving here because they feel like God's told them to come here, or it's a place of safety, or different things like that. And that being said, Michael, do you think that A lot of Americans are going to give their guns up when we come down to push comes to shove.
I don't think a lot of them are. I think the ones that are having their guns right now are having them for a specific purpose. What you're talking about, though, in the long run is that God is directing them to move to those areas where the cities of refuge are going to be established. And I don't think there's cities that are already there. I think they're going to be specific zones within the cities, but they're not going to be the cities where like you would say, Denver, Colorado, and talk about a base of 2 million. You would be cutting off Westminster and North Glen, or in St. Louis, you would lose Ferguson and some of the other outlying places. So when you say cities of refuge, I think they're going to be very specific. One of the ones I had this conversation yesterday with another minister, and the city of LaPorte, Colorado, the town of LaPorte. You know it. It's got what, one traffic light.
Yeah.
It's a very small place, but LaPorte means the door.
Oh, really?
And he was convinced that one of the main cities of refuge, or one of the main areas of refuge, if you will, was going to be at LaPorte, simply because it was given a name that meant something different than what most people took it for. And he thinks it was given by God, that name was given by God, and that's why it went that way. Actually, LaPorte, and when you look in history, LaPorte, Colorado, as small as it is, was actually in the running. It was one of the 2 finalists to have the state capitol put there when they were seeking statehood.
Really?
Yeah.
Well, that's interesting.
So, yeah, like I said, I found out a whole bunch of stuff yesterday, and I was talking with him, and I'm going, there is something to what you're saying, though. I think the people that are conditioned, that are inclined to go with the globalist point of view, those people are going to give up their weapons. Those people are going to go along with the crowd. They're going to believe in global warming. They're going to believe the crocodile tears. They're going to believe the statements that were made in the State of the Union. But those are such narrow perspectives that, yeah, you can say he did it right. One of his claims is he hasn't racked up as much debt as what Dwight Eisenhower did. Well, Dwight Eisenhower was working with a budget that hadn't hit $1 trillion, an economy that hadn't yet hit $1 trillion. And he put $900 billion, he designated $900 billion for the interstate highway system. So on an economic basis, looking at what the economy was, the fact that we were still at $35 an ounce for gold and that kind of stuff, he did have a larger percentage of the economic activity was in debt compared to what Barack Obama's done. But Barack Obama didn't make anything that was near as impressive as the interstate system. We haven't wound up with anything for this debt except more debt because he has a different agenda.
You know, and also when you're talking about agenda, up there in Fort Morgan, all those Muslims were basically told you can't work here. But now it's being said that because CARE got in there, now they have like 30 days and they can get their jobs back. Yeah,
30 days and they can get their jobs back. And again, I've looked at some of those things, whether it's J.P. Swift down in Greeley or the one over at Fort Morgan.
Oh, yeah.
And basically, when you talk to the people that are the supervisors, and they'll flat tell you that these are lazy people. They don't have a work ethic that is American. And again, there's not much of the world. This is one of the reasons we prospered. We had 40-hour work weeks that became standardized. And most places in the world, they don't. They have a 30-hour work week or a 24-hour work week. Or like in Greece, they also have early retirement. You can take retirement at age 52. Americans were a different breed. We have food. We have natural resources. And this is one of the things that really bothers me, and it changed my life, was when I was traveling the country with an Australian engineer. And at the time, I thought he was really old, and when I think back on it, he's 10 years younger than what I am now at the time. But when we got up to the Black Thunder mine in Gillette, Wyoming, to watch the chute, where they blew the debris up into the air because it's an open pit mine. And the plant manager was explaining how at that time they were removing 35 to 45 feet of overburden to get at a seam of coal that was 25 to 35 feet thick. And then they would take off another 40 feet of overburden to get at a second seam of coal that was 110 feet thick. And this old engineer walked away, and he came back about 5 minutes afterward, and the tears were still coming off down his cheeks. And he says, pardon me, but you don't understand. We go down 2.5 miles to get at a 6-inch seam of coal in Australia. That's how valuable energy is there. And here you guys are taking off a few feet of overburden and getting at a seam of coal that's equally, if not bigger, in thickness. He says, America's truly the land God blessed. And I had not thought of that before because I lived here my whole life. And compared to what other people have, yeah, we are the land that God blessed. And I think that's because, again, as you've already mentioned, Steve and Stan in their book, they put it. America's in the Bible, and what it means. You picked the name End Time Talk Radio for your show because I think we're there. And any measurements that you want to take, you can go through and see how our values have changed completely, and particularly in the last 50 years. We've just gone straight downhill. One of the things that I was going to hit you with, it's kind of a surprise.
Sure.
I don't know, have you ever looked at a U.S. president acknowledgement of a situation that is changing in his official letters or anything like that?
No, I never paid attention.
This one comes from May 14th, 1948, and it was from President Harry Truman. Now, this is what it says. This government has been informed that a Jewish state has been proclaimed in Palestine, and recognition has been requested by the government thereof. The United States recognized the provisional government as the de facto authority of the new Jewish state, and he signed it, Harry Truman. But as he signed it, he made some alterations to that statement. First of all, he says, and recognition has been requested by the provisional government thereof, meaning that they did not have a full government as of that time. And then he said, as the de facto authority of the new state of Israel. And I thought it was rather curious that he used that term state, because it wasn't a nation, it was a state in his eyes, and we were extending our protection, our federal government was extending its protection to that new, at that point, would have been the 49th state.
Yes.
And it's dated and approved May 14th, 1948 at 6:11 p.m. And then I've got the other backup material, but when you see those kind of things, Barry, we have forgotten our roots. Even the roots that we had just 67 years ago have been forgotten. We are so far off track, and this is why I believe our economy is faltering. This is why I believe that people live in fear of so many consumers, and we've talked about the drop in, but the consumers are not willing to part, and yet the problem is they're still putting their value, their faith in, or their wealth and they talk about it in terms of the dollar. And I think we're going to have to change that dialogue. We're going to have to change that definition. It's no longer what's happening in terms of the dollar, but it's happening what's in terms of God's will.
You know, and before I forget, I'm going to ask you this question. What do you think about Trump? Do you think he will get in?
I thought when Trump first started, I kind of liked him, and I really thought that though he was just going to do like be a shooting star, flashing across the sky, and burn brighter the closer he got to the center of the earth as he get more air resistance. But now I look at it, and I think the Republican establishment is extremely afraid of him because he has a unshakable base. The base that he has, and I think it's much larger than what they anticipated, number one. He's also going across the aisle. He's got a lot of Democratic base support as well. And this is why they're fighting him so hard. This is why they're attacking him. But I think it's interesting that it's coming from the establishment inside the Republican Party. And that goes back to a question that I put to you a while back. We elected a Republican Congress.
Yes.
What have they done over the last 2 years?
Negative,
over
nothing.
the last year to slow or stop this onslaught against our protected rights guaranteed by the Constitution?
They've been actually pushing it more than Democrats.
I agree. And this is why the Republicans are messed up. But this is why Trump has a real shot at getting the nomination, is because people like what he says. People, the average voter, knows in their heart that what he's saying fits with the American ideal more than either the leadership of the Republicans or the leadership of the Democrats is pushing right now. This is why, again, Obama is pushing so hard to get the vote for the illegals. He calls them undocumented workers. They're here illegally. They don't have a right to vote. And my biggest complaint in this whole mess with that is, and this is what I like about Trump, is he's not going to give them due process rights guaranteed by the Constitution. That is for the citizens of this country. These people are those that are here legally. These people are not here legally, and therefore they have no rights. They should be at the bottom of the list.
Oh, I know. And then, just like when you mentioned about how that one guy actually, or that lady, backed into the person and the U.S. Marshal had to show up. That's crazy.
I was actually my family member that works at the housing authority here. The Somalian lady backed in and hit a car, panicked, and hit the accelerator to get out of there, and took out 3 more cars and wrecked her car into such a state that it couldn't be driven away. But the cops, when they showed up, could do nothing until the U.S. Marshal got there, and then he said, you can't do anything to this woman because she is a refugee, and therefore she doesn't have to have insurance. She doesn't have to have a driver's license. She doesn't have to have any of the stuff that you and I as a citizen are required to have.
That's crazy.
Isn't that a mess?
And that's messed up. And that's what I like about how Trump is. I mean, I love his loud mouth. I mean, I just love how he just says it.
I sometimes I wish he would tone it down.
Sure.
But he is, he's not, the thing is, he's not afraid to say what he's feeling. The thing is, most of these guys that are running have never had a real non-government job. They've never had a job in the private sector and lived on that for any length of time. He has. Now, has he gone bankrupt? Absolutely. He's made mistakes. He admits those.
Mm-hmm.
This is what's so refreshing about Trump. But he has done it. He has rebuilt using the laws that these clowns put into place. Well, he shouldn't have been allowed to take bankruptcy. He should have had to pay those debts. That's not part of our process. We don't have debtor's prison. That was what our government founders were against. was having a debtor's prison where not just you but your family could be thrown into jail if you happen to die in prison, then those debts were still unpaid. They didn't like big government. They wanted a small government. And the more we go into this big government stuff, the more we go into this thing where people are reliant on what the government can give them, the less and less we have to actually live on, and the less and less value we actually have in ourselves. We don't look to ourselves anymore. We look to what the government can do for us.
Michael, as we're winding down, what do you think is going to happen up in Oregon with that standoff?
That's a hot potato in a lot of ways. I don't think they're going to do anything, the government. I don't think the government's going to do anything right now. I think it's going to be kind of like a mild Waco. I think what they're going to do is they're going to back off, let the situation cool down, and then they're going to move on them again. But they're going to move on them in such a way that these ranchers that are using public lands in a manner that they don't prescribe, they're going to take them to court and not give them the option of moving off at that point. They're just going to say, because you violated these orders in the past, we are going to impose a jail sentence on you and confiscate your house or your cattle or whatever it happens to be that they decide that they're going to take. At that point, the reaction is not going to be near as violent or near as raucous or as newsworthy, because it's going to now you're challenging a legal decision, and I don't agree with the legal decisions that are coming down because they're based not on law as much as they're based upon bureaucratic, faceless bureaucratic rules and regulations. Mm-hmm. And it's not in the law. It's in the bureaucratic rules and regulation that they set up. Now, does the United States government think they have the right to stick with those? Yes, they do. I don't. I don't think a rule or a regulation that isn't approved by Congress directly, I don't think the bureaucracy should have the power to expand that without congressional approval.
Mm-hmm. Do you think more people will stand up because of this?
I think that there's going to be more people standing up simply because gun sales are going through the roof. Now, if you want a section of the economy that is just absolutely flourishing, that's it. And it's because of what Barack Obama and his crocodile tears was all about.
Yeah. Well, Michael, I really appreciate you coming on. You want to talk about your rant and also in defense of a nation?
Well, in defense of a nation, we're currently tackling globalism, the world global order that has been established. We are definitely against listening to the United Nations. I personally think the United Nations ought to be out of this country. It ought to be somewhere else because I don't believe in it at all. There's too many votes in there that go Muslim. But as far as the rant, I talk about economics, I talk about politics, and whatever happens to catch my interest on that particular day. But you can contact me either through this show, the End Time Talk Radio, and Barry will forward the information, or you can write me direct at mccrant@gmail.com, and I will put you on the mailing list so that you can enjoy some of the stuff. I've gotten quite a large following, and I appreciate the people that take the time to write me.
You've actually had some pretty interesting people actually write you.
Oh, yeah. I had one guy just this week. My name is on a Royal Bank of Scotland list, and this insider sent it to me because I used to have contact with their lead attorney, and they told me, they said, get out. If you've got anything invested in the United Kingdom, get it out now because it's collapsing. And I thought that was kind of hilarious because this particular individual has not been with them for more than 10 years, and yet somehow my name is still on the list in his contact list. So I thought that was kind of hilarious. So that's what goes around comes around, and that's one of the nice things I like is the people that I talked to over the years have really kept me in their thoughts, or at least thought enough of me that they didn't put a black mark by my name after they made the contact.
Well, talking about list, talking to you has actually gotten me on a list of things, which is fine. I mean, whatever, we're all on a list, but it's just interesting, interviewing you actually has got the curiosity of other people listening.
Yeah, and that's how I do it. Is I travel to talk when I'm asked to, and then when one person hears, they say, "Oh, well, I got a group over here that would like to hear you," or "I have a group over here that hasn't heard that." I think the one that was the best is when I went into last year. In fact, it was last January, and I took in a jar of mayonnaise and a Santa Claus Russell Stover's candy bar that was for $1 billion, and I just was showing them how the price of the mayonnaise had changed, and from what it was, if I'd had 1 trillion jars of mayonnaise 4 years ago, I would have had exactly the same amount of value as what the United States Federal Reserve had printed dollars. Well, now the price had gone up. If I from $1.49 to $3.49, I still would have had the same amount of 1 trillion jars would have still been the same. The only thing is, to get the inflation that they want, to get the growth that they want, the volume inside the jar had gone from 64 ounces to 60 ounces. So it was kind of an interesting comparison. And I asked him, I said, the only difference between this, because it does, this candy bar, it does say, in Santa we trust instead of in God we trust, and it's it's got a serial number, it's got a signature from Mrs. Claus, the wife of Santa, and everything. It's worth $1 trillion. It's got all the trappings on it. But the only difference is, in time of trouble, I can eat this one. I can't eat the dollar bill.
True. Very true.
Yeah, and that's, so in reality, that's why I keep telling people they've got to think outside the box and stop measuring everything, all their wealth, all their assets in terms of dollars, and measure it in terms of livability, survivability. And
I'm gonna let you go, but one more question.
Sure.
Where do you think oil is going to go? Where do you think the price of oil will go to?
This was interesting. They made a big deal about it last week, that oil futures for May had gone as low as they were getting activity at the $15 range. Well, less than a week later, it's down to the $10 range. So the glut is still there, and they can't erase the glut by consumption because demand is down. And there's so many countries whose sole source of revenue for their economies depends upon the sale of oil. Saudi Arabia, Venezuela, you can go Nigeria, you can go right down the list. These governments are strapped, and the only way they can get capital is by selling oil. So they have to pump more when the price went down. Well, that doesn't help ease the glut. And I kind of chuckle at these guys who say that we have this glut and it's going to disappear by the middle of August or 1st of September this year. And I'm going, no, there's no way, because the economy overall is slowing so much and we're not burning near as much. And yet the United States and Saudi Arabia and Russia are currently producing more oil than they ever have. Russia's up to 10.3 million barrels a day. Saudi Arabia is at 10.8 million barrels a day. The United States is at 14.3 million a day. How is that going to help the glut? And when you have countries where the economy is totally failing, and I will use Japan, I will use the Eurozone, those were two of the hotbeds where oil was being consumed dramatically, and now they're not. The consumption rate has fallen to, in many cases, less than 75% of what it was just 5 years ago.